Good afternoon to those of you on the East Coast, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast. My name is Felix Shipkevich, and I am delighted to host our final webinar for the year. I'm joined today by my colleague, Yvonne Bowser-Caballero, and we have a special guest, Teresa Dodson. We had a last-minute switch. Our previous special guest, Nick Cosmas, had a last-minute conflict with the schedule, and we were just delighted to have Teresa join us. Teresa is a friend, and Teresa is not just a friend, but she is the founder and the leader of Women of Debt Relief. She'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. We're just super delighted to have this final webinar for the year. Unlike our other webinar, this webinar is going to be a little bit more of a podcast style type. Well, we still have slides, and we'll go through the slides after the traditional introductions. I hope this will be more of a conversation of the post-election analysis and its impact on the debt settlement industry. So hope you enjoy it. And something that is a little different in terms of the format, we will take questions. I usually don't, typically our webinars don't have questions, but if you see the chat feature, please feel free to leave a question. We will, after we go through the discussion, we will try to answer your questions at the very end of the presentation, and happy to take your questions. And of course, if you have any specific questions that you do not want to discuss publicly, then, and we're not going to mention, obviously, we're not going to mention your name, who's asking this question, but obviously, if you want to take it offline, you'll have a contact information at the very end, at the very last slide. A little bit about myself. I'm a regulatory attorney. I've practiced for over 20 years. I've practiced before administrative courts of the Securities and Exchange Commission, the CFTC, FINRA, the NFA, FTC. I've practiced before DOJ, and I handle cases before the CFPB, as well as before various state regulatory agencies and AG investigations and proceedings. I'm admitted in several states here in the US, although I only practice in New York. I am also admitted in England and Wales, though I do not practice in England and Wales. I'm a special professor of law at my alma mater, Hofstra Law Schools, where I teach the policy and business of cryptocurrencies, which today is a fun subject post-election, and I'm excited to be teaching it in a couple of weeks. And here's my textbook. So as I'm actually finalizing or updating my syllabus for 2025. I will now turn to, my colleague Yvonne.
Hello, everyone. If you do not know me, my name is Yvonne Bowser-Caballero. I'm counsel here at Shipkevich since 2021, almost 4 years now. I primarily focus on the transactional services side of the consumer financial, debt relief, lending, fintech spaces. I assist with federal and state investigative demands, consumer complaints. If you do a lot of licensing with our firm, you may be familiar with me. I do a lot of the licensing for states and on the nationwide NMLS system for our clients. And I am just really excited to be here with Felix and Teresa for our last webinar of the year.
Teresa.
Hello. So, hi, everybody. I'm Teresa Dodson. A lot of you may know me, and for those that don't, I've been in the industry for close to 24 years now in the debt settlement side of the industry. I have a consulting firm that I consult on both sides of the industry, meaning on the collection side and debt settlement. So I'm very, very well versed on both sides of the industry and how this particular topic may impact both. And then also, as Felix says, I'm the founder of Women of Debt Relief. We are heading on our 4th year of being a nonprofit organization, and we're continuing to grow every year. We just had a year-end wrap up, and it was really exciting to see that we've made some progress, even more than the year before. So little by little, I contribute a lot of that to our corporate memberships, and I'd like to thank Felix for doing a little extra for sure. Last year, I was able to participate in his annual workshop, and working with him on that particular workshop event that is going to be happening again January 30th and 31st of 2025. But last year we did it, and all the proceeds went to Women of Debt Relief. Extremely generous of Felix and his firm. We very much appreciate that, on top of also being a corporate member. So I'm very grateful for that, and we're doing it again this year in January. So we've got a great conference coming up. All the proceeds will go to Women of Debt Relief. Very excited to be here to talk about this subject. I think it's a very interesting one. And like Felix said, it's going to be a little bit of a different format. It's kind of, hey, it's a conversation. Got to keep it light. It's December, it's the holidays, So just a little conversation about it all. But thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm very happy to be here.
Absolutely. It's a pleasure to have you here, Teresa. And thank you for mentioning the upcoming workshop, a little bit more information. Last year, we had a sold out event. I think we sold out a week before the event, and then people still showed up. I believe that we ran out of seats, and we had standing room only, and throughout the entire event. We will be releasing the agenda hopefully tomorrow, right, Teresa? We're just waiting for 1 or 2 people to confirm our panel participation, but we have an exciting agenda. And for those of you who have attended our firms, this is our 5th in-person workshop. We do our best to make those workshops very interesting. We don't try to make our subject matter boring, and we try to keep everybody on their toes. And so if you it's not and would you say, Teresa, it's limited to compliance or legal, right? It's that anybody should attend, right? Business side.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think obviously compliance, legal, but operators, any operators that touch this industry, or even the collection side of the industry, should absolutely attend. The content that you typically put together is slightly different, or sometimes a little bit more edgy than some of the other conferences that you go to that are great. And I like that this is all packed in one day. And it makes it a lot easier for you to get a lot out of it very quickly. But we always try to make sure that I know Felix always tries to make sure that all of this subject matter that is part of the content of the workshop is stuff that's very relevant to what's going on today, and also stuff that makes you question how to do things better and evolve as a business.
Yeah. So please register if you haven't. But as always, we're extremely, extremely grateful to all of our sponsors. We are very grateful to our executive level sponsors, for Veritas, to Set Forth, CFT, Pay, CDRI, Reliant, and Global. Without the executive level sponsors, we would not be able to host this event. And just for those of you who understand how appreciative we're to the exec level sponsors, my firm does not put together a conference to make money in this event. In fact, it's we're not a trade association, right? So the exec level sponsors, they pay for lunch and the opening reception and closing reception, and we're very, very grateful for their contribution. The support level sponsor also pay for some of the other ancillary kind of like coffee, tea, Wi-Fi, Women of Debt Relief sponsoring the Photoshop booth, Advanced Cloud Solution sponsoring the Wi-Fi. Max Decisions is sponsoring the cookies and donut break. I mean, everybody is sponsoring something, right? Very, very thankful to Credit as well. So every sponsor is very important to us. Again, our firm doesn't put these events in order to make money. The $75 fee, everything goes to Women of Debt Relief. So just want to kind of explain how that works. Okay.
Oh, and also too, really quick,
yeah,
Felix.
Yeah.
Also, you remember that we've kind of created some new sponsorships that'll come out here really soon, that are fun and different. That'll happen at like the receptions, that are going to be we just wanted to do something like, I don't know, Felix said, make it a party. So there's going
Yeah.
to be some really interesting stuff. It'll be fun.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And we always try to make it obviously a great networking event during the social aspect of it because look, having been an attorney in my third decade, I attend a lot of legal events, and they're not always fun. Not always people think of lawyers as fun individuals. So I try to do something different, and I think we do a great job. I think that between the closing and opening and closing receptions and everything else in the middle, I think people have a great time. So thank you to our sponsors. Anyway, and you'll get a chance to meet all of them, and they're really terrific people and companies. Um, before I tell you about the topics of discussion, right, kind of how I came about this specific format, um, you know, so right now, this is what I call like the Super Bowl for regulatory attorneys, right? This is the season when people like me who are regulatory attorneys who live and breathe everything when it comes to their specific subject matter. And I focus on about four areas of law that I practice. And why is this the Super Bowl? Because it's not because it's the end of the year, and it's not because we just had an election. It's because we have two major things that are happening. The first major thing is we have obviously we have a you know change of power, right? Change of presidency, right? And that you know we have switched from the Democrats to Republicans, right? And president, right? And we also have now kind of the trifecta with a very obviously slim majority in the House, very, very slim majority, but still it's a trifecta, which is with the Republicans controlling all three branches of government. And that happens very rarely when you have a trifecta, generally in Washington. And that probably may not exist generally. Um, that probably will not exist in 2 years. Typically, historically, the incumbent president will likely lose the House in 2 years. So again, it's not guaranteed, but that's usually historically what's shown. So you have kind of this trifecta right now, and we'll see how that's, what that's obviously a pretty big shift from um, that's happening. The other thing that's happening that hasn't happened over 100 years is that you have a returning president, right? And I think a lot of people are forgetting that that's kind of a very unusual um, point of view that we forget a lot of times because Trump was a president before, right? We know what his presidency was like, and now he's coming back. And so there's a big question: is he coming back as the old Trump, or is he coming back as a brand new president, right? And we're already seeing that he's not necessarily bringing back his old policies back into the White House. He's bringing a brand new team. He's bringing people that are very loyal to him. And that's a very important way to analyze the future, from a regulatory perspective, because without it, it's very difficult to help your clients navigate um, the landscape over the next first of all, immediate landscape, and then over the next 2 years before the midterm elections, and then the next 4 years. Um, so I wanted to mention that that's a critical point over the next during our presentation. So we need to take that. So 2 points. One, you have the Republican trifecta, right? So just a major switch from Democrats to Republicans, and you have a returning president, which the last one was President Cleveland. He was the 22nd president and then won the election, 24th president. So obviously that didn't happen for a while. So what are we trying to do today, right? The first thing I just really want to breeze through, what is the Republican House and Senate agenda? Again, we're talking about the debt settlement space, but I think it's important to talk about just the general agenda because most folks, even though we're focusing on the debt settlement space, always think that debt settlement is too important to them. And when I spoke at IAPDA, if you remember, a few weeks ago in Florida, I tried to explain to the audience when I did an in-person presentation is, don't think that debt settlement is a big industry. It's not. In terms of consumer finance, it's just a small grain in terms of consumer finance, because if you look at, debt collection, consumer credit counseling, bankruptcy, consumer lending. I mean, I could continue to go on and on. It represents a really small part of a consumer finance area. And so we need to obviously understand everything from a macro level before we start to granulate it down and funnel it down to the debt settlement space. Then I want to discuss and have a discussion with Teresa and Yvonne. What are we basically going to expect from the state and federal level, right? First, obviously, what do we expect between now and January 20th? And I know many people already think, well, who cares about January 20th? Well, there's many things happening, and we need to touch upon that. And then what to expect immediately, what happens when Trump takes office, right? What do we know? What do we not know? Then I'd like to compare and contrast Trump's administration's first 4 years to Biden's 4 years as it reflects to the debt settlement space, right? And then finally, we'll kind of wrap up with what does it all mean for the debt settlement space and how do you prepare? Kind of a hypothetical, and then we'll take your questions if you have any. Okay? All right. So this is very high level agenda for 119th Congress. By the way, I will not do as much talking. I apologize if I'm hugging the microphone, but I said this is going to be a podcast style, but it's important for me to lay the foundation for the conversation. Okay? So this is the Republican agenda for the Senate. These are the high level points, right? You probably read it in the news. You probably see it on television. You read it in the Wall Street Journal, whatever news you receive. Tax, right? The Senate Republicans want to amend the tax code. They want to bring back SALT reduction. Tax is a big objection. Housing is a big object for the Republicans in the Senate. Access to capital, regulatory oversight, nominations, and crypto. House Representatives, tax oversight of regulators. Now, I guess you could say that there's an oversight, regulatory oversight, regulator, same thing really between the Senate and the House. So that's a big one. And the first thing that comes to mind is DOJ, right? Okay, so maybe that's it. Is DOJ going to have an oversight of regulators, or do Republicans in the House and the Senate likely to eliminate some forms of federal agencies? We can talk about that in the next few minutes. Crypto is very big, very, very big. I wish this was a crypto webinar. I have a lot of things to say, but that's not. You could talk to me offline about that. Obviously, regulatory reform, fraud and scams, and data privacy, right? So these are very big for the House representatives. Okay. Now, before we talk about the federal level, right? I want to ask questions. I want to turn to the state level. And here's why. Everybody wants to start off talking about the federal level, and then they're going to talk about how the federal government is likely to shrink. And we'll talk about that, whether or not that's going to happen. But, what about the state level? What do you think the expectations are on the state level? What are we likely to see on the state level, and why? What do you Yvonne, or I don't know if you want to take the lead, or Teresa, what do you think? Why do you think the state level may be more important to talk about than the federal level now?
Yvonne, do you want to go? Do you want me to start?
I can go ahead. So what's really important to understand when you with the dynamic between state and federal is sometimes necessarily less federal involvement doesn't necessarily mean a more favorable outlook when it comes to enforcement, because typically states will take upon themselves the void and enforcement left by a less active federal government. In this case, for this space, a less active CFPB, FTC, focusing on the debt relief and debt settlement industry generally. So we have seen some recent legislation this past 4 years from Virginia now requiring the registration of debt settlement companies in 2021. And the more recent California CCFPL debt settlement registration requirement which Felix and I actually just did a webinar on, and we'll discuss more at our workshop in January, that becomes effective in February of 2025. And while like 2 states may not seem like a lot of states, you know, taking action when it comes to legislation and registration requirements, it's more than what we saw during, you know, the first Trump administration. And it'll be interesting to see if we see states continue to trend that way or if it will die down during the second Trump administration. But when it comes to enforcement, you know, we have seen some growth from states, and I think we will continue to see that growth. I don't think, you know, that because of this new election, we are going to see a massive change. If anything, perhaps more aggression because there is going to be that void in enforcement. And I don't know if you want to touch on some of those aggressive states a little bit more, Felix, or Teresa, if you have anything to input.
Yeah, so the non-attorney in the room. So this is
And
just,
and let me tell you something. God bless you, because sometimes I want to hear from non-attorneys and attorneys. You make a lot more sense than when I speak to attorneys.
no, I just don't have to filter.
That's right.
But you know, from an operator's perspective in the debt settlement space, I mean, right now, even in the last couple of years, and then definitely more recently in this past year, at the state level, a lot more, it's a lot more aggressive, a lot more aggressive, a lot more lawsuits, a lot more of the state regulators looking into debt settlement companies, and it typically is surrounding their marketing materials. And I know that we're going to dive into that a little bit later. For whatever reason, you know, me not being able to have a crystal ball and understand why it's heated up so much on the state level, the reality is it has. And I'm not quite sure why, but it really has. And so if I'm an operator in the debt settlement space, I'm really going to be overseeing and looking at and monitoring, I should say, what's happening at the state level, not only within my industry, but anything that surrounds financial services. I think that sometimes a lot of people in the debt settlement space don't realize that what can be happening and happening in other aspects of the financial services industry, meaning collections or debt buying, anything like that from a compliance or regulatory standpoint can profoundly affect us in the debt settlement space equally. So there's an opportunity for that to happen. And so that's something that I'm always wanting my compliance or legal counsel to be monitoring is what's happening in those states. What are they being aggressive about? Because I definitely know the aggression's gone up on debt settlement, but what other parts of the industry as well? So I think that that's going to continue. I don't see that slowing down. That's my opinion from the state level.
So I'll give you my thoughts about why state level is arguably state level overview, and why companies in the debt settlement space need to look at state level licensing, oversight, and enforcement, more important today and arguably over the next 4 years than on the federal level. I'm not discounting. I'm not at any point way discounting the federal oversight. I'm not. But if you compare the past 2 years, we actually spoke about this at our last workshop, but particularly 23 and 24, we've seen a significant rise in the number of CIDs and investigations by the Attorney General from a number of state and state agencies. So that's one. And the number of inquiries have significantly increased, particularly on the type of advertising material, type of licensing issues, UDAP, state UDAP related issues. They've looked at attorneys, and also be very mindful that even though a case that was brought almost a year ago against a debt relief company called Strategic Financial Solutions in upstate New York, which was spearheaded by the CFPB, it was also joined by 7 attorney generals. Okay, 7 attorney generals. And you don't typically see that. You typically see a federal regulator taking a lead, but 7 AGs joined that lawsuit. So the fact that 7 attorney general joined that lawsuit is an indication that the states are becoming a lot more active. What I'm also seeing is that generally the state are deciding to take lead on enforcement side. Now, be mindful that the state have the ability and capacity, if they want to take capacity, to use TSR and federal statutes to also go in conjunction with the state statute to go after the participants without the need to go, and knock on the door of the CFEB to see if they want to do this, right? So while there's an illusion, and I want to underline the word illusion, that there's going to be, this kumbaya, and we'll talk about them. We'll talk about the federal level. There's going to be this relaxed mode of the CFPB, which is an illusion when it comes to the debt settlement space. The states, if we're talking, again, this is the end of year webinar, we're talking about 2025. I think you have to look on the state level supervision and state level enforcement. They will become a lot more involved, a lot more aggressive, and some states have become. Obviously, if you'd like to know which states, we're happy to discuss them. You should come to our workshop. We'll discuss these states and provide you with more information, but the states obviously will become a lot more involved. And we've seen that in the last 2 years. So stay tuned for that. Is there anything, Yvonne or Teresa, anything else that I missed about the state discussion? Anything else that you want to add that you feel that I missed? Anything? Or should we move on to the federal side?
I have a couple of questions.
Sure.
To wing it both of you.
Yeah, of course.
So if I'm a debt settlement company and I've already seen, or I'm now being made aware that, that the state level, that it's been a lot more aggressive as far as inquiries and things of that nature, and it will continue to get to that point. As a debt settlement company owner or operator, what can I do to make sure that I'm prepared for that? I mean, I have a few ideas, but I want to be able to lob that over to you guys, because I want to make sure, one, if I have to be licensed, bonded, registered in that state, that's a give me. I got to make sure that that's in place. I have to make sure that I legally have I legally am able to operate in that state. I mean, that's a given. But are there other things that I need to be aware of or looking for to minimize that risk?
That's both a simple and a difficult question to answer. The simple part of it is you pretty much answered it, right? Which is look at the bonding and the licensing if the state requires you. The more difficult part of it is the unfair deceptive act part of it, right? You have to take a look at the overall picture of your activities and how you're doing business, and whether or not, and again, that's a very hypothetical question, right? Whether or not the services that you're providing, right? But overall, are the customers understanding in the type of programs that you're performing, right? Do they understand what they're getting into? Are you properly and timely settling your debts, right? For instance, some of the major issues that I've seen some of the regulators is, the clients are making payments towards their settlement, but the settlements are not being done. That's an issue, right? There's no reason why somebody should be participating in debt settlement program, accumulating debt, but there's no negotiation with the creditor, right? There's no negotiation being done. Other simple things, for instance, that I've seen across the simple mistakes, if a settlement is done, it's not memorialized in written form, which is required. You need to consent, right? You need a written consent. You want to make sure that you dot your I's and cross your T's from TSR perspective, but also the most important thing is does the client understand what he or she are getting into? Do they understand the cost, right? Do they understand, how long does the program last? Very simple questions, right? But at the same time, I just think regular compliance review makes perfect sense.
Okay.
Yep. And just building a little bit off of that, I think just like Felix mentioned, just really harping on looking at your marketing materials, making sure that, you're not running into any UDAP issues. Many people may not know, like, for example, in Minnesota, you're required to have a specific advertising disclosure in your marketing materials. So, just simple things like that. Just doing an overall review of everything that you have public facing forward will be really important.
Yeah, I mean, Minnesota was a very good example because Minnesota statute requires to have certain disclaimers, and some companies may not even be aware. So that's good. And the final note, and I think we can move on from the state, is nothing is happening with the states. Okay, while there might be some, you know, I live in New York and I practice in New York. I'm not too thrilled with the leadership in my state, and it's okay if I say it publicly. I really don't care, but at the same time, there's no major shift on the state side in any state that I could think of. It's really on the federal level where there's an earthquake, right? So nothing is really happening on the state side that I could think that there's any earthquake in any particular state, even if you have any type of leadership change at the top level. So, unlike the earthquake that we have right now on the federal level, there's no earthquake on the state level anywhere that I could think of, right? And when you do have that leadership change on the state level, it's not really anything that, like, people are running for the hills and like creating Doge type of agencies, right? So the state level monitoring and enforcement and supervision and compliance, it has to be always kind of on the same level. Like you just have to keep your eyes on the same part. Okay. All right. Let's talk about federal level. I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne because Yvonne, that's your slide. I'm going to talk about what to expect.
So the two federal regulators that we're looking at here are primarily the FTC and the CFPB. And when it comes to any sort of expected rulemaking changes, it's really unlikely that we're going to see any rules under consideration being issued as proposed rules at this time, given the time constraints and other priorities that these agencies may have. But the current administration will likely try to push and finalize some of its proposed rules and initiatives. We actually just saw that, a couple of proposed rules be issued as final rules, over the last month. But something to really keep in mind is the Congressional Review Act, which many people may not be familiar with. So the Congressional Review Act allows Congress to rescind any federal agency final rule within 60 days of it being published in the Federal Register via a joint resolution in each house, the Senate and the House of Republicans, or House of Representatives. Since the new Congress is going to convene within 60 days of the release of any final rules from election day until the new administration enters office, the 60-day review window is going to reset. So the new Congress, the new Republican-led Congress, is going to have 60 days to look at all of these final rules that were recently published and decide whether or not, they want to revoke any of those rules. So an important note to make is that under Republican majorities in both houses in President Trump's first term in 2017, Congress successfully repealed 16 rules utilizing the Congressional Review Act. And that figure represents 80% of all Congressional Review Act reversals since its implementation in 1996. So we can see that a Republican Congress under, Trump's leadership is not afraid to use the Congressional Review Act, to revoke some of these rules.
Wow, Yvonne, I did not know this.
Yeah, the Congressional Review Act, I have to tell you, in every, sorry to interrupt, but in all these this blitzkrieg of continuing legal education webinars that I participate in, I've probably done, Yvonne knows, right, about a dozen in the past since November 5th. All the big firms now doing what's happening after election in all these different areas, and they're actually a lot of fun to participate. Some actually great, some a little bit dry. Every one of them is talking about the CRA, Congressional Review Act, right? And it's kind of like if you think of the Matrix, right? Do you want to take that pill, right? Do you want to take that pill? It's like the pill. Everybody wants to like, first they talk about all the laws, right? All the laws that were enacted during, the last like 6 months, even though it's 60 days. There's actually a question whether they could potentially go more than 60 days because there's some arguments to make that you could extend that more than 60 days. But I'm not going to go into that now, okay? Because I'm not, first of all, a CRA specialist practitioner in that. But it's mind blowing that every webinar that I'm attending, it's like, and the CRA may appeal that, right? Like for instance, there's a question whether the open banking rule could potentially be repealed or modified using the CRA. There's a question whether the recently final rules of the payment, this several hundred pages of final rules involving payments, the regulated payments companies, the CFPB issued could be completely, repealed. So while there are no statutes affecting the debt settlement space that were enacted by the CFPB or the FTC that would affect this industry, just for your own, as they say, shits and giggles, right? You hopefully you learn something new, that the Congressional Review Act is going to be like so widely talked about after January 20th, because it's going to be like that magic pill that hopefully Republicans, and again, I'm not taking the side of Republicans, but I'm telling you, we'll be talking about how they're going to repeal a lot of these, recently enacted laws. Okay. So anything else? What about supervision enforcement?
Yeah.
Do you?
I can go ahead and speak on that as well. So really, we haven't seen much in terms of changes. It's pretty much business as usual from a scheduling standpoint as far as it comes to supervision and enforcement. You know, we could see the CFPB trying to squeeze in a few examinations. Obviously, that these examinations, CIDs aren't public record, that would otherwise occur after the change in administrations. And, there may be some accelerated efforts to close out some open examinations prior to the change in administration. But really, there isn't any sort of massive change. And I don't know, Felix, if you want to speak on the figures a little bit regarding enforcement.
Sure. So look, um, what my position, which aligns with some of the other practitioners in this space, is it's not just business as usual. You're looking at the number of enforcement actions that are being brought by the CFPB and the FTC, and it remains the same. And you could even arguably say may even be higher than that of other months. So we did statistics of, let's say, the CFPB's enforcement actions, right? In August, they brought two. In September, they brought two. In October, they brought six, right? And the question is, why was there a rise in October? There could have been, sometimes right before the election, there could be some potential factors to motivate to say, like, we're doing it to show that we're, especially if it's the party of the president, we're looking to do it for public policy reasons. Again, I'm so look, it's part of the executive branch, right? Any agency is part of the executive branch. So um, in November, it brought two, but today is December 10th, and already we already had two just this month. So there you go. So it's not just business as usual, but we still have enforcement actions. The FTC is filing plenty of cases. Um, and on top of that, these are publicly available announcements. If you actually take a look at Pacer as an example, like I represented a client. I can't discuss that client, but the FTC sued this client and froze um, this client's accounts. And got a TRO. Through just about 2 weeks ago. First of all, through ex parte practice, meaning they got this without knowledge of the client, and now it's been unsealed. This is not publicly available on the FTC's website, right? So, and now the client has been put into receivership, right? I mean, that's it. It's no longer a client because now it's in receivership. Why am I telling you this? Is because that's also an enforcement proceeding, right? They filed a case against someone, they shut somebody down, and they put them into receivership. That's not announced yet on the FTC's website. I mean, last time I checked, as of yesterday, it wasn't announced yet. It will be announced at some point. So you have to dig further, and this is the data that I gave you is just what's publicly available on the CFPB's website. As an example, the case from the FTC is just I gave you this because I know about it, right? Because I represented this particular client. So that's an example. But until January 20th, 2025, I'm expecting a lot more cases that I think they were trying to wrap up and just going to try to push them. I don't think, as an example, Director Chopper is just going to say, okay, you know what? I mean, he knows his days are numbered, right? There's going to be a new director. That's no question. So I don't think he's going to say, all right, well, my my job's done here. No, he's going to try to have enforcement push these cases through. And obviously, whatever happens, with a new director. Maybe they might continue these cases or they may not continue the cases. I don't, that's a question. I don't know, Teresa. I know we've been hugging the microphone on this, but I don't know if you have any thoughts.
Well, yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before. It's, because the biggest thing that comes up for everybody that I talk to is, okay, now that there's a change in the administration, does that mean that the CFPB is going to go away? Which I totally don't think that's the case. But they're thinking, maybe things are going to get completely turned upside down and that it's, a little bit of breathing room and less enforcement action. The only thing I do know is I don't think the CFPB is going anywhere. I do think that possibly it's going to be reevaluated and looked at as to how their existing policies and procedures are currently, working. I think the oversight's going to be a little bit different. That's just, my uneducated guess, again, not an attorney, but I can see that happening. But I think there's a purpose for the CFPB. I think that it's not going to go anywhere, but I think it could change slightly in the way that it's conducting investigations or bringing investigations. I think we can see some changes there. But I would never take the stance of, I would take the stance of business as usual, as to be on top of your game. Make sure that you are, from a compliance standpoint, airtight. Because the one thing we do know is that nothing is going to change immediately. And that, as you just indicated, there are more and more enforcement actions that are being pushed through right now, in cases that are being pushed through right now. And what that turns into, we don't know. Where that ends up, we don't know. But you just got to make sure your own backyard's nice and clean,
Absolutely.
and that you're really making sure that you're not sleeping behind the wheel, taking things for granted, thinking, oh no, that's okay. Please, just, you've got compliance people, lean on them. You've got your general counsel, or you've got your outside legal firms that you're working with. This is the time to really lean. Take this opportunity to really clean things up, or even if you don't need to, double check it, triple check it. Make sure you're prepared for whatever's ready to come, because we don't know exactly what will happen.
Absolutely. So in terms of the CFPB, I'll give my 2 cents. People may disagree. The CFPB is not only going anywhere, I do not see in the very near future. Maybe that would be a good kind of the next slide. I don't think, not only the CFPB not going, I don't think there's going to be any reduction in staff of the CFPB. When in 2022 at our webinar, at our in-person event, if you remember, this was at the Avenue of the Arts Hotel. This was immediately after the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, before they decided that the way the CFPB was funded was unconstitutional, and we're very privileged to have Bryce McNitt from the CFPB present. Bryce McNitt actually will be presenting again this year at our event. Will be when we announce the agenda. But anyway, and I said the CFPB is not going anywhere, and the Supreme Court, the decision was 7-2. This was a pretty big majority, including the conservative justices. So despite Elon Musk's tweet, delete CFPB, it's redundant, it's not going anywhere. There's that's not just redundancy. The agency is now 14 years old, and I think that we could have a very philosophical discussion, but that's not going to be a top priority of immediacy of the Trump administration. That's just not immediate. I think they're going to be cutting down programs. I think there's plenty of money to cut, in my opinion, than cutting down an agency. And definitely not the CFPB. That's not going to happen, in my opinion. Anyway, anyway, nothing is going to happen in terms of staff or people or even enforcement staff. All right, let's talk about what do we expect when, like first few days, first few weeks. I think that's the very, very big question, right? Because a lot of people think that, okay, January 20th, baton has changed. First of all, we don't even know who Trump is going to nominate as director of the CFPB. I'm focusing on the federal level now. It's very obviously we're not going to have Lena Khan as the chair of the FTC. She either is going to step down just to be a commissioner, or she's going to resign. We're not sure what that's going to happen. I haven't really kept as much about her. I do a little bit more work with the CFPB, but we know Director Chopper is not going to be in charge, right? But I haven't seen yet publicly who Trump is going to nominate. There've been some names floated, but until you actually see his Truth Social tweet, it's anyone's guess. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a relative of his, right? I'm kidding. I'm just being facetious here. Don't take it seriously. Next thing I know, somebody's gonna write an article say that I said it's a relative of his. But we don't know who that is, right? But we know it's going to be somebody different. So pass the baton. So what's the immediate when he takes effect, right? And you have to kind of, there's an expectation when somebody takes the baton, right? That when it comes to working for federal or state or any government agency, it's like working for a private company, right? Like, kind of like remember when Elon Musk walked in with the sink and let that sink in, and then he I finished reading his like almost 700-page book, and like he fired like 80% of the employees, including engineers. Yeah, that's not going to happen in federal government, okay?
No.
No, right?
No.
So what do you think will happen immediately, in your opinion? I'll give you my thoughts a little bit later, but what do you think? What do you both think will happen?
Nothing. I don't think anything immediate is going to happen. I think it's like the minute, he gets into takes office, it's really about observing and kind of taking in everything. I don't think you're going to see anything immediate. I don't think that'd be very responsible. Now, that could just be me being naive, but I just can't imagine anything immediately happening that's going to shift or change and be like a big put everybody in an uproar. I think it's going to be 90 days plus before you start seeing stuff, but that's just my opinion.
Okay. Well, I think it's a good no. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Teresa, you really kind of like hit it on the nose. I think it's just a general freeze. Everything's going to be frozen pending new leadership review. We're not going to see anything go away. We're not going to see any staff reductions. We're not going to see investigations go away. But I do think there's going to be a major pause pending, new incoming leadership's review of, whether it's investigations, rulemaking initiatives, any sort of guidance being issued by agencies. So just generally, like you said, it's just going to be a bit of a hiatus while, the new leadership, takes in everything that they've now inherited.
I look at it as more like a big red pause button, right? Wherever the director is going to be, I think they're just going to press that button when they walk into the office and say, we just need to pause. right? Do you remember when Hillary Clinton had that big reset button with Russia? Remember there was a whole like controversy, like it didn't really set reset. Remember when she became the Secretary of
No.
State? Yeah, she was supposed to under Obama administration reset. So I think there's going to be that like reset button at the CFPB, in my opinion. I mean, look, I think immediately they just, look, any federal agency is obviously very bureaucratic, right? I mean, like it's everything requires a memo, everything requires meetings, like, you know, agencies are, and the more localized you go, the worse it gets. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to sound horrible, but please, I know on this webinar, I have state and local regulators. I don't mean to say it's worse. It's just federal level is a little bit more efficient, and then when you get to like local level, it's like I think of going to a DMV, right? It's just
Ugh.
like things are really slow, really slow, right? But everything will require a memo. Everything will require a lot of meetings, right? So there's gonna be this big reset, big pause button, and so basically, any proposed rules that have been, proposed, that they just there's gonna be a question: do we really need these rules? And then there's gonna be, big scissors and like, okay, we don't need, toss them, big garbage can, we don't need that, right? And then any rules that are finalized that could be on the CRA, Congressional Review Act, see if that could be thrown out, bring them to the floor of the House and see if we could get them thrown out that way. In terms of enforcement action, that's the big question, right? That's like, okay, what happens if I have an action, if I have a CID? Okay, let's start with a CID. If I currently have a CID, nothing, okay? Your CID is still a CID. Is my CID likely to go away because there's a change of a director? No, the CID is not going away. The question comes down to is, um, is when there's a change, if there's a different focus eventually, if there's a different focus for an agency, whether or not they're going to want to pursue, whether or not they're going to want to pursue your specific um, case and turn it into something, or they're going to want to try to just saying they're going to close the case, or maybe saying like we're at this time we're not going to pursue it. But it's not automatically. Don't just think like it's going to go away. And if you have an enforcement action, no, that's a legal proceeding. I, rarely, I don't want to say extremely rarely, but rarely uh, will I see a case just be withdrawn because of change? No. If the federal government brought a case against you, that case is proceeding. Okay. You might have a better opportunity if you have a more favorable position to settle that case. Do you understand? Like you might have a more favorable, I can assure you that people in the crypto community are more ecstatic, to there's so much. I think Gary Gensler in his a couple of years being at the charge of the SEC, I attended one, big firm's webinar on the future of crypto. Had brought 92 enforcement cases in crypto. 92 just in crypto. That's incredible. So the question is like, like how many? Well, not all of them obviously outstanding. Some of them have been settled, but many of them in litigation. How many the SEC going to continue? So in the media, I just think like big pause, right? Big pause button on anything. I think the proposed rules are just not likely to move forward. Okay, so we're getting towards the end. So if you want to start putting in your questions, feel free to. Okay, sorry. Next 4 years, what do you think will happen in the next 4 years?
Again, crystal ball, don't have one.
Let's kind of shake that.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's just the honest answer. And until we figure out who is going to be running the CFPB moving forward, how much the new administration will want to come in and kind of reevaluate things, and have any kind of oversight at all. That's going to be interesting, right? Because if those things happen, then there will be some changes. And it depends. Those changes could be pretty big, or they could be very minor. So what to expect in the next 4 years? I would be much more happy to answer that question or speculate in June. From my
Okay.
perspective, that's where I think, okay, maybe I can kind of see where things are heading at that point.
Yvonne, what about you? What do you think?
I think we can expect the priority of examinations to change, but like Teresa said, I think it's still unclear as to what those priorities are going to be under the new administration until we get a new director in place and until we see, what this administration has to say once they take office. I think we are still going to see consistent enforcement activity from the CFPB. I don't think that the CFPB is going away, like has been previously stated. But like we mentioned in the beginning, I think there's going to be less coordination with state attorneys generals. And, that is going to not necessarily lead to less enforcement, but it's going to mean that, you are dealing with individual state agencies, individual state attorneys general, if you do get an investigative demand, rather than dealing with a cohesive effort from the federal and state side.
Gosh, and you know what? Getting investigated from the state level versus federal, I mean, there's a big difference in that. And neither one of them is less of a headache. I mean, they're both equal the amount of work, equal the amount of pain. It's just different, right? I mean, that's just in my experience of what I've seen. So that'll be interesting. And the interesting thing for me is, we knew when Trump is like, Trump's coming back into office again. Okay. And the first time he was in office, he had a pretty aggressive approach to things, right? But a lot of the speculation is that because he was kind of tiptoeing through the political, the whole political environment of being the president and the administration that he was working with, maybe he knows how to navigate his way a little bit better through it this time around. And maybe, and this is speculation, and I've heard this conversation numerous times, will that be a lighter touch or will that be a hammer? It depends, right? It depends on, and that's the thing. It's like I can't even speculate because, you know, our newly elected, or reelected President Trump that's coming in, he can be both sides of that coin. And the administration that he has working with him could be both sides of that coin. Who knows? I mean, if he's coming in with a hammer or with a lighter touch, and that's going to determine the outcome of how aggressive any of this is going to turn out, right? So that's again in June, I feel like I'd have a better sense of it.
I think that you bring up a good point. I think that the lighter touch is going to be more on the strict interpretation of the rules. And I think that the harder hand and harder, like, is going to more for fraud, right? So if you look at historically, generally speaking, under the Trump administration, agencies have still heavily pursued cases of fraud, regardless of whether it was the CFPB, the FTC, the SEC, the CFTC. All these agencies still pursued fraud on the same level. I don't think that changes, and I want to be very clear. Um, but what's different generally, and then I think maybe that's a distinction between Republicans and Democrats, is that and again, I'm not trying to play politics here, but if you want to, there's obviously been articles here about Republicans try not to bring enforcement cases on loose interpretations of the law. They try to, only if it involves some egregious, they'll try to give somebody a warning, and if they don't listen, they'll bring a case. Again, that's a generalization. I'm not trying to put everybody in the same bucket and brush saying everybody, but also generally speaking, if you look at the enforcement cases brought under, again, just a comparison, right, what to expect in 4 years, if you, again, talking just the enforcement side, I think we're going to have the next slide about that, but just the numbers, but if you look at the cases brought under Biden and Trump, you have less against officers and directors under Trump, right? More under Biden, right? And I think that's an interesting distinction. not necessarily that you didn't have any officers or directors, but you know, let somebody like CFOs and CCOs and CEOs breathe a little bit better, because if you are sued in your capacity, unless it's fraud, you probably will be named in that capacity. So that's another major kind of distinction. Um, and fines and penalties, again, generally you could expect. It doesn't mean that. It's obviously very factual and it varies from case to case basis. You probably will have lower penalties on for those for Trump versus Biden, under the second Trump. So on the regulatory side, I imagine we probably will have less proposed rules, probably less of that, just because we're already an hour into it. So let me kind of wrap it up with this interesting stats. I'll kind of just give the stats because I think it's just to kind of for the sake of time. How did enforcement actions in the Biden administration compare to first Trump administration? I asked this at PDA conference, and then people, some people said under Biden you had more. And I said, no, that's wrong. And then people said the Trump because that was the process elimination. And the answer was no, it's actually identical, right? So it was actually the number of enforcement action against debt settlement companies was identical, okay? It was 4 and 4. So that's the illusion that people have, that they think that it's going to be, okay?
And that was an aha moment, by the way, because I was sitting in the
Yeah,
room when you asked that, and I loved it because I think that was a huge misconception. And it was like, oh my God, like people around me were like, wow, I didn't realize, So that was kind
right.
of interesting stat.
Because first it was like, oh, under Biden you had more, because that was automatically an
Oh
assumption.
yeah. Oh yeah.
And then when I said nope, and then they're like, oh, then they must be under Trump, right? Because the process elimination. Like, no, but it's actually identical, right? Identical. And actually, under the Trump administration, you had one of the 4 actions was against the law firm,
Mm-hmm.
right? So then think about that, right? So think about that. Um, yeah, that was an aha moment. It's like, wow, didn't think about that. Um, and anyway, and if you actually want to talk about the Federal Trade Commission, I'll just throw that statistic. And we did that analysis. Under the Trump administration, you had, and again, we're talking just generally debt relief cases that include student loan cases, credit repair cases, and debt settlement cases. Just if you actually had more cases filed under the Trump administration, 21, under the Trump administration by the Federal Trade Commission, the first Trump administration, then 19 cases under the Biden administration. That's another myth, right? So another myth. Just something for you to chew for those of you who are still here. I know that we kind of rule over time, but something, if you're still with us, interesting enough. Again, that's another myth we try to debunk here. So that's another one. All right. So final question, what does this mean for the industry and how should you prepare? I think I've done a lot of talking. You know what, Teresa, I'm going to let you kind of sum it up because I think you probably will do the best one to answer this one for both of us, for all
Well,
3 of us.
I'll be happy to. And I kind of touched on it a little bit earlier. And what this means for the industry and how you should prepare is just keep moving forward as if nothing is going to change in your world. No magical thing is going to happen that's going to shift everything to where the CFPB is, kinder and gentler and nicer or goes away. The FTC is not going to go away. Your state regulators aren't going to go away. Nothing dramatic is going to change. So what I would do is take this time to make sure that you're working with your head of compliance or your internal compliance team, your general counsel, your outside legal counsel. Get prepared, double check everything that you're doing from the licensing, bonding, registration perspective, but also your marketing materials. All of your marketing materials, please do a re-review. Even if you think you viewed it again. Take this time to be like bulletproof, man. Just you're a business, protect it. Take a look at everything that could possibly be an area of weakness within your organization that you could take this opportunity to strengthen it. Because if You've got state actions that are increasing and becoming more aggressive. It's just a matter of time. If you haven't already been hit with those things, you're going to get hit. It's just how you respond to them. It's how prepared you are. Being prepared and not being reactive is the best thing that you can do for any company. I don't care what business you're in. And, you know, even if in the things as far as, you know, data security, those kind of things within your IT department and your IT team, make sure that you've got process and procedures in place to be able to make sure that you're handling all of that stuff correctly as well. It's not just around your marketing materials. It's not just around licensing. It's also around, you know, how are you storing your data? How are you sharing your data? Are you doing it the right way from a compliance standpoint internally? Because you know what, guys? If you, like I said before, I've looked at the whole financial services industry, and that's a huge pain point in the financial services industry. And guess what? As a debt settlement company, you're in it. You're in that industry. Take a look at it. Just take this opportunity to look at everything and just be ready and be prepared, and make sure that, again, you're bulletproof, as much as you possibly can be. Those are the things that you need to be doing, that you should be doing anyway. But just get in there and take the opportunity to do it now, and redo it. Even if you think you're perfect, what's it going to hurt to look at it again? Not going to hurt anything.
I couldn't have said it better. I'm gonna leave it at that. I mean, Teresa, let me tell you something. You nailed it. Um, First of all, thank you so much for joining us as a guest.
No,
This was
thank
awesome.
you. This was fun. I like having this
Yeah,
conversation. I like the conversation format.
absolutely. And we're gonna have a lot of conversation format at our event in a little more than a month, and I hope many of you who are here today will join us. This was a lot of fun. And we're going to see everybody January 30th, 31st in person. Here's contact information. Thank you so much for joining. Happy New Year, happy holidays, and we will see you in 2025.
Yeah. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.